The focus of this lecture is portrait and contemporary art. However, we're going to begin with two references to street art. While we already learned about street art from the late 1970s and early 1980s, a lot has changed since then. What was once called graffiti is now known as street art, and it's taken much more seriously. You might know about Banksy, whose art famously self-shredded in an auction as a protest to the art market and the commodification of the creative process. Street art is intended to be a critique that's open and available to everyone, everywhere. I want to highlight artists like Banksy because he made art more political and direct in his communication. He points to the gaps in culture, highlighting disconnects between mainstream media narratives and social criticism. Your fourth film is by Banksy, and there will be a quiz on this in the fifth week. The film is titled Exit Through the Gift Shop, and it's a documentary that offers insight into a broad range of contemporary international street arts. One of the main artists featured in that film is Shepard Fairey. You might be familiar with or even own an Obey hat or t-shirt. When Shepard Fairey was an art student, he began creating small drawings featuring Andre the Giant, a wrestler from the 1980s who was also an actor in films like The Princess Bride. Andre the Giant would slam opponents into the mat, commanding them to obey. This became his signature catchphrase. Fairey was inspired by both the figure and the word, incorporating them into his early street art pieces, and that evolved into the Obey brand. Later, when Barack Obama was first running for office, Shepard Fairey created the now iconic campaign image, continuing his practice of making art accessible to the public. Artists who paint political figures and presidential portraits are typically known within small circles of portrait galleries. Kinde Wiley was renowned for his broad range of artwork, particularly for painting people from his environment, from his world, but in historic Renaissance poses. He elevates his subjects by depicting them in everyday clothes while placing them against ornamental backgrounds reminiscent of Rococo paintings with their characteristic flowery decorative patterns. Amy Sherald painted the portrait of Michelle Obama. What makes her work unique is how Sherald paints her subjects in a grayscale where the skin tones are similar to what you might see in a black and white photo. Highlighting colorful backgrounds of clothes and accessories is a technique that encourages viewers to look first at the person as a whole rather than focusing solely on their race. Amy Sherald also created a painting of Breonna Taylor, who was killed in 2020 by police after they broke into her apartment, mistakenly believing her boyfriend was a drug dealer. Sherald painted her in a powerful pose, looking directly at the viewer with a peaceful expression, as if saying, "I'm here, look at me." Since Taylor was to be engaged before her death, Sherald included her engagement ring in the portrait. Gerhard Richter is a German artist who I mentioned in our discussion about German artists in the 1970s. There's an interesting story about Marcel Duchamp's Nude Descending a Staircase, the image on the left. Duchamp had declared it would be the last painting ever needed to be made, claiming painting was dead and that conceptual art and artistic experience were more valuable than mere mimetic representation. When Richter saw this work as a student, he thought, "This guy is saying this is the best painting ever? Well, I can do better." So he asked his wife to walk down the stairs and he painted her. The resulting work looks like a slightly blurred photograph. Though he was painting from life, he also worked from a photograph, and he was pushing the boundaries of what photorealism was to make this painting deliberately resemble a photograph. Richter drew his inspiration from magazines for many of his paintings. While pop art was flourishing in the United States with its focus on commercial imagery, Richter chose to paint from different source materials, including soft pornography. His work included critiques of minimalism through his exploration of shadows. He painted stripes and grids with distinctive photographic quality. For example, he would paint a simple white grid with softened shadows that creates an illusion of depth while maintaining a strikingly flat space. His experiments in color were extensive, like this painting with 268 different colors. It's like a thesaurus for a poet, containing endless potential combinations of color waiting to be arranged. This exploration coincided with the conceptual art movement and the questioning of art's nature. He created a notable stained glass window for the famous cathedral in Cologne where he lives and works. This was initially controversial because Gothic cathedrals traditionally feature figurative work rather than abstract art. His other abstract paintings often feature blurring and blending techniques created by dragging large squeegees across wet paint. While this technique wasn't directly related to photography, it shared similar methodologies in creating blurred effects. His work demonstrates a remarkably diverse range of approaches within a single career, including some forms of photorealism and portrait. Richter's work took on a political dimension, particularly in his portrait of his daughter from the mid-1970s. This period saw violent protests involving the Red Army faction, a small group of young college-age protesters who were killed during their confrontation with police. The media published photographs of the incident showing one member dead. This image deeply resonated with Richter, questioning how any protesting youth could have met the same fate. This prompted Richter to paint his own daughter in a pose similar to what was so widely distributed, critiquing the media's handling of these events. Another striking work shows his daughter who is reading a newspaper, combining this everyday moment with photorealistic qualities. The painting reveals intricate details, the blurred effects, the seemingly reflected light from the newspaper, and the Baroque-style dark background. The composition is brilliant, featuring strong diagonals from the bottom left to the upper right, with perpendicular angles formed by the newspaper and his daughter's face. Richter painted his daughter many times at different ages, this time with her face turned away. Portraiture remains one of his defining achievements, often drawing from deeply personal subjects. The use of his daughter as a model reflects his broad interest in exploring how the personal relates to the broader world and how individual experience connects to a larger context. This subjective aspect, seeing his child within the world's framework, becomes a significant element in his portrait work. Chuck Close was a prominent artist who moved between minimalism and photorealism. This is something I mentioned a few weeks ago, that the two movements were very closely connected. His work produced stunning images using various unique techniques. This one in particular, this massive painting, was created using only his thumbprints. If you're ever riding the Q train in New York City and stop at the 86th Street station, the entire lower level is covered with Chuck Close portraits. Each of the artists we've discussed used different techniques in their work. Alex Katz works with a more graphic approach and frequently features his wife as a subject in his paintings, capturing moments of everyday life. His work shows distinctly simple yet powerful relationships between design and color. While the previous three artists were prominent since the 1960s, let's move on to more contemporary artists from the past 25 years. Kerry James Marshall is a fantastic artist whose work is a precursor to artists like Amy Sherald, particularly in his use of tonalities. A significant aspect of Marshall's work is beyond his extensive portraiture, and it's inherently political in nature. Born in Birmingham, Alabama, raised in South LA, and now living in Chicago, Marshall often states, "How can my work not be political?" As a black man who lived through the Watts riots and in Chicago conflicts, and his perspectives naturally inform his art. His work remains primarily on figures and portraits, people in everyday contexts, often domestic scenes like a barbershop haircut. His piece, Our Town, carries a double-edged quality. While depicting a fun scene with children bicycling, it specifically references housing complexes where riots occurred. There is an underlying violence in these environments, particularly visible in the Nickerson Gardens, where you see flowers in the background and children playing alongside figures lying down. John Curran centers on exaggeration in his work. He takes fashion models and twists and bends them in his work, creating interesting interpretations that may or may not directly relate to fashion imagery. This approach connects to Mannerism, a movement between the High Renaissance and the Baroque periods, which was known for its exaggerated figures. Even Michelangelo, after the Renaissance, created Mannerist paintings. One of Mannerism's notable features was the elongated neck, and Curran's work follows in this tradition of exaggeration. Here's a striking example showing an extremely elongated neck. The figure's profile is remarkably distorted anatomically, which brings me back to my introduction about portraiture in contemporary art. Many artists like Curran deliberately push beyond realistic representation, even when they're capable of painting more lifelike figures. Looking at more of Curran's work, this image in particular is featured in Nocturnal Animals, a film directed by Tom Ford where Amy Adams is in one of the lead roles. The painting's presence in the film, with its exaggerated events, complements Curran's artistic style perfectly. Marlene Dumas is originally from South Africa, but lives and works in Amsterdam. She is known for her self-portraits, which feature an exaggeration of color. Her work differs from early Expressionism by artists like Matisse or Edvard Munch. While they used exaggeration of color for specific feelings, Dumas creates an atmosphere where individual emotions are represented through her use of color. She works across a range of subjects, including striking paintings of babies that are quite large in scale, over 6 feet tall. She also creates delicate ink washes of figures in large groupings. Many of Dumas's portrait subjects come from newspaper images of current events. One notable work, Measuring Your Own Grave, references a disturbing news story about imprisoned people who were forced to dig their own graves before their execution. This piece emerged during the early 2000 Iraq conflict when many such detainees' images appeared in the media. Like historical paintings of the deceased, Dumas documents public images of death that appears in newspapers and on online media. Zheng Fanzi takes a different approach to portraiture. Rather than aiming for photorealism, he creates masks that represent a false self, always showing a smiling, content face regardless of the circumstances. These masks suggest a deeper commentary on the pressure to have an appearance of perpetual happiness, despite what might lie beneath. Karen Kalimnik's creative process transforms images from media. This reflects a broader trend among contemporary artists who work in a field that's already saturated with media images. Kalimnik specifically focuses on celebrities and fashion models, reinterpreting them in her own distinctive style, including figures from Calvin Klein campaigns, for example. Her work explores our fantasies about wealth and fame and royalty, imagining life in a palatial country estate. She critiques this imaginary world behind the media veil through both portraiture and paintings of imagined spaces and places. Her celebrity subjects often have royal connections, whether literally or symbolically, such as Leonardo DiCaprio in what might have been the Three Musketeers film, or Paris Hilton in her self-styled princess of celebrity culture. Yoshimoto Nara plays with the relationship between punk culture and childhood innocence. His pieces feature cute children who are getting into trouble, reflected in their transition from childhood to adolescence. These children are depicted engaging in rebellious behaviors like smoking or fighting, embodying a punk aesthetic. What's particularly interesting about his paintings is how they blend anime and manga influences with a unique artistic technique where he would, for example, use raw wood. I don't want to grow up is a recurring theme, making his work more than mere cute cartoons. It's social commentary. There's a striking irony in his images of children wearing peace shirts while wielding weapons. Elizabeth Peyton draws heavily from media images, particularly focusing on rock stars. She's painted Kurt Cobain and various British rock stars from bands like Blur and Oasis, and the artist David Hockney in his youth. Though she never met many of the subjects in person, working only from photographs, her work explores objectification, reflection, and mediation. Her paintings examine how we form assumptions about people we think we know through the media. She spends considerable amount of time on these intimate, small-scale portraits, creating truly remarkable gestural pieces. Jenny Saville is a British artist who was part of the YBA, the Young British Artists movement. She frequently created self-portraits, and interestingly, she plays with the concept of skin in painting. Just as a painter talks about canvas as the surface of a skin, built up with thin layers of oil paint to create transparencies and luminosities, Saville uses this concept literally in her self-portraits. Her skin becomes the dominant subject matter, and she maps it out objectively while noting areas she might want to change or finds unappealing. Rather than glorifying herself, she represents her authentic perception of self. One piece shows her with her sister as a child, demonstrating the range of her work's reflective focus. She also created a substantial series of portraits featuring people in morgues. Lisa Yuskevich is an American artist. She has stated that her biggest influence were images from Playboy and Penthouse magazines, which she secretly took from her brother's collection as a child. These were considered the coolest images in media at that time, and their influence is evident in her work. Her paintings often feature seemingly young female figures, a common theme in pornographic imagery, and she explores this youth-focused aesthetic through her artwork. While she rarely includes men in her paintings, and when she does, they appear as secondary figures with exaggerated female subjects. This image seems to address many of the critiques she's received about her subject matter. New York-based Wangechi Mutu is remarkable as an artist who specializes in portraiture and self-portraiture using collage and watercolor. Her figures possess a distinctive mythological quality created by carefully gluing elements like eyes and mouths onto her works. Her pieces are characterized by splashes resembling blood, and she even incorporates motorcycle crash imagery into her collages. Her work frequently features elements that appear to be exploding or bleeding or dripping, though these aren't tied to any specific mythology. In one striking example, she depicts a severed snake's head beneath her boot. Deborah Roberts, who is based in Texas, creates fantastic collage work. While distinctly different from Wangechi Mutu's collages, Roberts specializes in powerful images featuring children. One of her signature techniques is to combine children's bodies with the collaged adult face. Her work explores this fascinating tension between innocent children and the adult face layered over them, creating an unsettling veil effect. This specific piece was inspired by an incident from a few years ago where a child was shot after ringing a doorbell. Henry Taylor is an artist from Los Angeles who worked in a mental institution for over 20 years. During his time there, he consistently drew, and people encouraged him to attend art school. After retiring in his late 40s, he enrolled in an art school where he discovered it wasn't just about learning art techniques, but it was about political debate and gaining exposure to different perspectives. Taylor internalized this approach using his own world and life experience as his lens. His work often features seemingly simple domestic images like portraits with kids or an image of Jackie Robinson, but there's a deeper meaning beneath the surface. Take, for instance, a scene of people sitting on a sofa at home with flowers. If you look closer, you'll notice that the paperwork is actually prison visitation forms, and in the background, there's a chain gang working by a roadside with the sign reading, "Warning, shots not required." This juxtaposition reveals an everyday reality of living with incarcerated loved ones and the associated dangers. In the history of portraiture, the focus was primarily on religious figures, heroic individuals, or battle victories. However, contemporary portraiture has become more subjective, emphasizing personal identity and self-expression. This connects directly to how we represent ourselves in social media.